Welcome to Planet America. I'm Chaz the Chadello.
And not John Barron. I'm Julia Baird.
This week, to jail or not to jail? We ask a New York judge whether Donald Trump will be running his election campaign behind bars and what to expect if he appeals his guilty verdict.
Meanwhile, President Biden's son Hunter is also making history for all the wrong reasons, while Dr Fauci is accused of a COVID cover-up. But first,
it was the conviction that stopped a nation.
Former President Donald Trump is now a convicted felon. He is the first ever former U.S. president to be convicted of a crime.
Well, that's how Fox Dallas described the former president. This is how he described himself.
I am the political prisoner of a failing nation.
And he wasn't the only Trump sounding off. Don Jr. wrote, "This is what a third world banana republic looks like." Eric Trump wrote, "May 30th, 2024 might be remembered as the day Donald J. Trump won the 2024 presidential election." And Melania Trump said, but look, Melania doesn't need to comment because other conservatives are doing the speaking for her. Megyn Kelly wrote, "The country is disgraced. Alvin Bragg should be disbarred. They will rue the day they unleash this lawfare to corrupt a presidential election." Meanwhile, Mike Johnson wanted to skip straight to the Supreme Court.
I do believe the Supreme Court should step in. Obviously, this is totally unprecedented, and it's dangerous to our system.
Then the comments really ramped up. Tucker Carlson wrote, "Anyone who defends this verdict is a danger to you and your family." And conservative reporter Sean Davis wrote, "If you're a Republican running for office, you can just go ahead and throw away all your elegant little policy proposals for this or that corporate exclusion or tax subsidy. Give me a list of which Democrat officials you're going to put in prison or get lost." Almost the only conservative keeping a calm head was Maryland Senate candidate Larry Hogan, who wrote, "Regardless of the result, I urge all Americans to respect the verdict and the legal process. At this dangerously divided moment in our history, all leaders, regardless of party, must not pour fuel on the fire with more toxic partisanship." To which Trump campaign manager Chris Lasavita replied, "You just ended your campaign." Even fighters at the UFC were weighing in.
President Trump, you're the man, bro. It is a damn travesty what they're doing to you. I'll be donating to you, my man. Let's get it done.
Meanwhile, Democratic politicians were trying to keep a lid on things, often focusing on defending the justice system.
It's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict.
Montana Senator John Tester put out a statement so muted, I'm not even sure he knew the trial had happened. The statement said, "Senator Tester respects the judicial process and believes everyone should be treated fairly before the courts." Okay, sure.
well, former presidential rival Hillary Clinton weighed in as well, taking the opportunity to mention she'd recently had some new merchandise made based on a phrase she says she hears a lot. With the words, "Turns out she was right about everything."
She wasn't right about not campaigning in Michigan, but anyway.
Then there was E. Jean Carroll, the woman who a civil jury found had been sexually abused by Donald Trump and whom Trump was ordered to pay more than $83 million in a defamation trial when he denied it. She had just one word to say: justice. It is odd, Chaz, that Trump was found liable for sexually abusing a woman, and that kind of took over news coverage for a day or two, compared to this.
Yeah, you're right, actually. I mean, look, I guess the sexual abuse was a civil case. This is a criminal case. So there's obviously a higher burden of proof for criminal cases, and obviously there's jail time on the cards now. People get excited about jail time, but
with good reason, but yes.
Yeah. No, but your point, I think, is a more than fair enough point, because when you're looking at the actual accusations here, the trial just now was about misreporting expenses, and that was about sexual assault. And so I think you ask a very good question.
Right. The question is what upsets people more. And another good question is what this could mean in November. A Snap YouGov poll found most reactions to this verdict, predictably, followed party lines. 50% of people and a majority of Democrats agreed with the conviction. 30% and a majority of Republicans disagreed. As for changing their minds, 5% said they would no longer back Trump and 3% said they now would back him. So what are those polls taken a day or two later, once the dust had at least begun to settle? Again, those with strong views before the verdict likely held the same views afterwards. More than half of Republicans, according to Reuters Ipsos, said the conviction had no impact on their vote. 10% were less likely to support Trump, while 35% said they were more likely to now. But there are three interesting results in these tea leaves. First, the independents. Nearly half of them in a Morning Consult poll said they want former President Trump to drop his bid for the presidency now. 8% of Trump supporters agreed and 15% of Republicans, a number which is roughly in line with the support for Nikki Haley. And Reuters found 1 in 4 independent voters were less likely to vote for Trump in November compared to 1 in 5 who were more likely and 56% who were unmoved. Second, the disengaged. Given that CBS found those who've heard a lot about the trial are more polarised in their views, the disengaged are possibly more likely to be swayed by Trump's status as a convicted felon.
Yeah, that could be an issue for Trump because until now he's been dominating amongst the disengaged. I'm talking about the young, the non-white. He's been doing really well until now.
Right. Now, third, the double haters. According to ABC Ipsos, 65% of those who view both Trump and Biden unfavourably think this week's verdict was correct, with 67% saying Trump should end his presidential campaign. That is a lot of resistance from a very important voting group. Although political experts have urged caution with these polls, rightly pointing out that finding before, that 1 in 10 GOP voters are less likely to vote for Trump, is very similar to the polls conducted before the verdict. And polls in a couple of weeks' time will be more illuminating.
I suppose also it's no surprise that the double haters have turned against Trump. I mean, they're haters, aren't they?
They're not happy. Now, some might argue the most important way to measure the impact of this case is in cold, hard cash. And the Trump campaign has been crowing, saying they raised $52.8 million in the 24 hours after the verdict was announced. It is a massive sum for a single day. Team Trump says a third of the donations were from brand new donors. But to put that in perspective, the Biden campaign raised $51 million in the entire month of April.
Yeah, they reckon Trump and the RNC combined apparently raised $141 million for the month of May. Wowzers, that is cash. Anyway, it's interesting how the conviction has generated such different reactions from different people, and nowhere was this better displayed than when Republican Congressman John Rose brought his 6-year-old son, Guy, to the chamber.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address the terrible precedent set in our country 4 days ago. Using the justice system to engage in a politically driven prosecution and now conviction of a major political party nominee running for president, especially on the charges brought against Donald Trump, should gravely concern every member of this body as well as every American across our country. Regardless of one's opinion of the current Republican nominee, we'd be well served to remember the long and cherished tradition we have in this country of settling our political differences at the ballot box. For nearly 2.5 centuries, our nation's elected leaders have properly resisted the temptation to oppose their political rivals through the weaponization of our justice system. Equal justice for all. And an overall trust in our justice system is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
I think Guy spoke for a lot of us during that speech. But you might be wondering, if this verdict is so outrageous to so many people, how did 12 jurors unanimously agree to it? Interestingly, after endless coverage about Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen, legal experts are suggesting the most important testimony might have come from Trump's good friend, National Enquirer editor David Pecker. 3 of the 4 transcripts the jury asked to have read back to them were from Pecker. Pecker's phone conversation when Trump asked him to assist in the campaign, Pecker's testimony regarding the Trump Tower meeting where they hatched the scheme, Pecker's testimony about the other catch and kill story involving Karen McDougal, all Pecker. Although, according to Trump, one of the critical factors was that he wasn't allowed by the judge to use the standard reliance on counsel defense. That's a defense that he's just doing what his lawyer told him to do. Trump says, "My lawyer at the time did virtually everything on the non-disclosure agreement, and I assumed that what he did was correct." Look, if that's true, then Trump should have used that defense. He would have gotten off the charges. But the reason why Merchan didn't allow Trump to use that defense is not because he was biased. It's because when Trump was asked before the trial began if he wanted to use the advice of counsel defense, his lawyers said no. Now, why would they do that? It's because that defense requires you to waive attorney-client privilege, so the prosecution could then have forced Trump's lawyer Alan Weisselberg to testify against him. And Trump didn't want that. Weisselberg knows where all the bodies are buried. So Trump's whinging only tells you half the story. Of course, that's also subtly blaming his defense lawyers, the guys who said no. And his defense lawyers have been subtly blaming Trump right back.
How involved was Donald Trump in his own defense?
I mean, what do you think? I mean, very involved. And he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. He jokingly said to us a lot, sometimes he wanted to be the litigator. You know, he wanted to be the one that was actually arguing because he's a smart guy and he knows what he's doing. We made every decision together.
Now, to be clear, Blanche wasn't being too negative there, but hey, the guy's still hoping to get paid. Trump has also suggested there were critical witnesses missing from their case, but of course, they could have called whoever they wanted to. This was Blanche's take on all of that.
We never saw Keith Schiller, Alan Weisselberg, some key figures here who got brought up a lot. Why didn't the defense call any of these witnesses?
Well, because we happen to live in America and we don't have the burden of proof. And so there's not... That's not the point. That's a question that is a loaded question that should not be asked of a defense attorney or a defendant. The question that we asked the jury, and they ultimately obviously got passed, is why the prosecution didn't call those witnesses, right?
So the prosecution should have called the witnesses that the defense thought would help them? Okay, but none of those are the main reasons why. Even conservative legal analysts like Fox's Andrew McCarthy were calling this one of the most ill-conceived, self-destructive defences I have ever seen. McCarthy's biggest concern was their whole defence was built around obvious lies, like Trump's insistence on telling voters that Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal were lying. They never slept with him. It makes no sense to deny your complicity in legal conduct when there's so much evidence for it. It got to the point where Todd Blanche actually looked the jury in the eye in his opening statement and said Trump didn't reimburse Cohen for the hush money payments. Even though Trump has admitted publicly that he did several times. He once even tweeted it out. And as McCarthy put it, people suspected of crimes don't lie unless they're trying to cover up wrongdoing. It makes the jury wonder, why would Trump lie about something so stupid unless he was covering something big up? Of course, it also opened the door to Stormy Daniels then having to defend her story in the most humiliating and damaging way possible for Trump. And yet, amazingly, even now, Trump is still denying he had sex with her.
But with these people, they were able to use people salacious. By the way, and nothing ever happened. There was no anything. Nothing ever happened, and they know it. But they were as salacious as they could be.
And that was as convincing as it was coherent. So where do we go from here, Julia?
Okay, first up, Trump will now likely be asked to attend an interview with a probation officer for a pre-sentence report. He'll be asked questions about his personal history and criminal record for a report which will be sent to the judge to take into consideration when sentencing. That sentencing is scheduled for July 11. He may face time in prison, but Legal experts say this is unlikely given he's a first-time offender and this is a non-violent paper crime. The fact that Trump is the presumptive Republican nominee and a former president with Secret Service detail could make the judge reluctant too. This is what Alvin Bragg's predecessor, former New York County District Attorney Cyrus Vance, had to say about it.
The president has made this a little more complicated by having been found in contempt 10 times during the court. But I think that with the proximity of the Republican convention 4 days after his sentencing, and then if he is the candidate for the Republican Party, the proximity of the election, I would be surprised that he would be sentenced to any imprisonment.
So if a jail term is avoided, punishment is most likely to include probation, fines or community service. Observers have been eager to offer their suggestions for community services, with one former top prosecutor in Manhattan suggesting picking up trash on the subway.
Works for me. For what it's worth, Norm Eisen has analysed dozens of cases brought by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in which falsifying business records was the most serious charge. Roughly 1 in 10 of those cases resulted in a sentence of incarceration, so not many.
No, but the other obvious question is about appeals, which could see any sentence delayed. And Chaz, Donald Trump does have some serious grounds for appeal, doesn't he?
Well, he seems to think so. Although, importantly, appeals can't be second-guessing the jury's judgment of facts. They need to be about the legal calls that could have affected the jury's judgment. Probably, in my view, the most likely grounds is the way that prosecutors stretched a state law till it covered federal election laws. That was a bit weird. Trump supporters in particular will be looking at how in the same 2016 election we're talking about here, Hillary's campaign hired one law firm to hire another firm to conduct Oppo research on Trump's ties to Russia, which eventually became the Steele dossier, and the Clinton campaign called that legal expenses, much like Trump did with his hush money payoffs. But the Clinton campaign paid $113,000 in 2022 to settle their federal investigation into whether they violated federal election laws, and that was it. A somewhat different outcome.
It's an uncomfortable comparison.
It really is. But there's other grounds for appeal as well. Yeah. Some other grounds Trump's team seem to be considering. Machan's refusal to move the trial from Manhattan, his refusal to recuse himself, his decision to allow Stormy Daniels to testify about her alleged sexual encounter with Trump in such detail, and his ruling restricting testimony by one of the expert witnesses Trump wanted to call. So look, we'll see. Probably sometime next year.
After the election.
How about that? But we'll see right now what Judge Diane Kiesel has to say. She's a former New York Supreme Court judge and professor of law at New York Law School. Judge, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you.
First of all, Judge, we should ask, as an expert of New York courts, were you happy with how the trial played out? Or did you think any of the critiques were reasonable?
By that, if you mean the critiques by Donald Trump about the trial, the answer is no, they were not valid. Judge Juan Merchan is a judge I worked alongside of for a number of years. He is considered smart, temperate, patient, and he exhibited all of those qualities throughout this trial. This is a man who kept his cool, even though every single day outside that courtroom, Donald Trump was calling him corrupt, conflicted, and a disgrace. I think it took a lot of courage and strength for Judge Merchan to be able to put his head down, follow the law, and do his work.
Do you see any potentially convincing grounds for appeal from this case?
Well, the charges, ironically enough, because this was a unique legal theory, it could well be that a higher court would say that either the charge the judge gave to the jury about the crimes with which Donald Trump was charged was inappropriately given, or the theory was so unique it doesn't exist under New York law. But frankly, I would be surprised at that kind of a decision.
Judge, when it comes to sentencing, how much weighting should be given to the rather minor crime versus the rather major lack of remorse from Trump and the rather major contempt violations? Should the latter matter at all?
Normally, what would your thinking be as a judge? Well, you've got a 77-year-old man with no prior criminal history. He has a home. He's gainfully employed, or at least was until the last election, right? Has a business. One would think he would not get an incarceratory sentence or even probation. But you do have to factor in other issues. The fact that he has shown no remorse, the fact that he has been highly critical and in an improper way against the court. Look, you can say you don't like what a court is doing to you, or you don't like the way your case is going, but to insist that the judge participating in the case is corrupt and the entire process is bogus really goes to the heart of our criminal justice system. And I can see that upsetting a judge at sentencing time. In addition, everything is on the table during sentencing. Remember, Mr. Trump was just found responsible in a civil case for libeling a woman who successfully claimed he sexually assaulted her. He was just found responsible to the tune of almost $500 million for civil fraud matters involving the state of New York with his businesses. So these are all matters that the judge can consider. And how they play out in his mind, well, only he knows. But I strongly think he will at least consider all of that.
Okay, and let's say Trump does get prison time. Am I right in saying that any prison time would likely be suspended first to the election, and then if Trump won, till the end of his presidency?
That's an interesting question, and I have no idea. Theoretically, the judge can completely ignore the upcoming election, right? That has nothing to do with the charges with which Mr. Trump has been found guilty and the jury's determination. If he were any other person and he were going to be sentenced to jail, the judge would simply impose sentence, and Mr. Trump and his lawyers would be free to go to the appellate courts and ask for a stay of that sentence pending the outcome of any appeal he might make. So he might do that. Whether at sentencing, if the judge is contemplating an incarceratory sentence, if the lawyers say, Your Honor, will you hold off until after the election? It's within the judge's discretion to decide to do that or not.
Judge, how concerned have you been about the attacks on judicial independence lately? And I'm not talking here just about Judge Merchan, but also about Justice Alito. Criticising or savaging judges seems to become a national sport. Does that worry you?
Absolutely. It worries me very, very much. Having worked in this arena for 25 years, I don't recall a time that judges were subjected to such backlash, if you will, because of their decisions or because of the work that they do. Look, again, you can criticize the courts. You can say you don't like a certain crime being prosecuted, or you don't like what some of the judges' rulings are. But to go to the heart of the judicial system itself and to say it's corrupt, and the judge who's happens to be presiding over a particular case is conflicted, or a criminal himself, that's just wrong, because it definitely undermines the criminal justice system in this country, and that's a dangerous thing. The courts stand, I think, between anarchy and peace and tranquility in this country and in all countries. And if people don't respect the word of the court, I think we're going down a very bad road.
Judge Diane Kiesel, thanks for visiting Planet America.
Thank you.
The criminal trial of Hunter Biden is going to be the first in US history for the child of a sitting president. Hunter's facing 3 firearm felonies, 2 for lying about his drug use on the form he filled out to purchase a gun, and 1 for possessing a gun while he was an unlawful user of a controlled substance. And he's going to have some trouble beating these charges, to be honest, given he wrote these kinds of things in his memoir. I was a crack addict. I had no plan beyond the moment-to-moment demands of the crack pipe. Now, his lawyers have a few potential defences, noting that the gun purchase form was altered after Hunter submitted it. Apparently, they wanted to hurry Hunter out of the store because his dad was a famous Democrat, so that wasn't a good look for them, and then they filled it in later, although a witness says they did see him fill in the drugs declaration box. His lawyers are also questioning whether maybe Hunter wasn't a knowing addict because he just completed an 11-day rehab stint, so maybe he thought he'd beaten the habit, he thought he was sober at the time when he ticked no on that drug abuser box. Maybe, but the only problem with that is that while Hunter had the gun, he was texting his then girlfriend things like, "I was sleeping on a car smoking crack." And then there are the tax charges pending as well, so Hunter's in some strife. But his dad's trying to walk a tightrope between supporting his son and not inappropriately supporting him. So he put out this statement. As the president, I don't and won't comment on pending federal cases, but as a dad, I have boundless love for my son, confidence in him, and respect for his strength. Our family's been through a lot together, and Jill and I are going to continue to be there for Hunter and our family with our love and support.
Now, finally, Dr. Anthony Fauci was grilled this week during a House subcommittee hearing about the US response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This was Fauci's first public testimony on Capitol Hill since his retirement from public service. And some of the questions were barely veiled attacks.
Do the American people deserve to be abused like that, Mr. Fauci? Because you're not doctor, you're Mr. Fauci in my few minutes. No, I don't need your answer. I want to talk about this right here.
Mr. Chairman,
Fauci,
objection.
I reclaim my time.
Objection.
I reclaim my time. I reclaim my time, Mr. Raskin.
Gentlelady will suspend.
Mr. Chairman,
of order.
Just in terms of the rules of decorum, are we allowed to deny that a doctor is a doctor just because we don't want him to be a doctor?
Yes, because in my time, that man does not deserve to have a license. As a matter of fact, it should be revoked, and he belongs in prison.
Will suspend.
Now, Democrat Jamie Raskin objected to this line of questioning in a way that went instantly viral.
Some of our colleagues in the United States House of Representatives seem to want to drag your name through the mud. They're treating you, Dr. Fauci, like a convicted felon. Actually, you probably wish they were treating you like a convicted felon. They treat convicted felons with love and admiration. Some of them blindly worship convicted felons.
But on a more serious note, Dr. Fauci shared the dark side of this febrile environment.
There have been credible death threats leading to the arrests of 2 individuals, and credible death threats mean someone who clearly was on their way to kill me. And it's required my having protective services essentially all the time. It is very troublesome to me. It is much more troublesome because they've involved my wife and my 3 daughters.
At these moments, how do you feel? Keep your mic on.
Terrible.
Do you continue to receive threats today?
Yes, I do.
So what did we actually learn from the hearing? Fauci testified that he believed the US had some sharpening of communication to do to better prepare for the next pandemic. And as for controversial measures like the 6-foot social distancing rule, which Fauci had previously said sort of just appeared, Fauci clarified.
And I made the statement that it just appeared, and that got taken at like, I don't know what's going on, it just appeared. It actually came from the CDC. Was there any science behind it? What I meant by no science behind it is that there wasn't a controlled trial that said, compare 6 foot with 3 feet with 10 feet. So there wasn't that scientific evaluation of it.
Fauci denied that he had profited from the pandemic, and he also denied accusations he tried to bury the idea that the virus leaked from a lab in China by bribing scientists and conducting a cover-up. No evidence was cited for these allegations.
Honestly, I know these hearings get mocked, especially Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I actually think it's kind of good that people can put their wild theories to the person themselves and then they can bat them down if they have the ability to. It's a lot better than them festering in some corner of the internet.
Right. I get that, but I also think that's wildly optimistic too. They continue to fester, and sometimes you can air them to an even broader audience than currently existed.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you're right. There's nothing good about them at all. Thanks, Julia.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, that's all for another trip to Planet America. On Friday, it'll be David Lipson in the chair for the Fireside Chat.
And Planet America will be back next Wednesday at 10 p.m. on ABC TV and anytime from 9 p.m. on iView, YouTube and Facebook. See you then.